And so it really depends what part of the journey they're in. And so having sales folks that can adapt and understand these different use case scenarios. Again, our industry is getting more complex, not less. So there's definitely more, I would say, demand from a salesperson. It's not picking up the phone and dialing. That's not what's getting deals done today. It's understanding their IT needs. Really, at the end of the day, that's what's getting deals done. And when you can have a conversation, to have the talk, you don't have to go deep and be the deep technologist, but you have to really understand what they're trying to accomplish and how. And so sometimes you can come up with creative ways to help them out. And that really is what closes deals. And so having folks that really are adaptive and can understand that is I think, is going to be what the new sales organization is going to look more like versus your traditional smile and dialers, right? Hi, this is Ian McClarty, and you're watching the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast, where each week I interview experts in and around the data center industry, and we talk about advice for folks across the whole go-to-market team: marketing, sales, customer success, product management, channel partnerships, and executive sponsors. And this week I am thrilled to have with me a very special guest. I'm welcoming Ian McClarty, who is the president of phoenixNAP, based in Phoenix. Ian, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Joshua, for the invite. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. So, Ian, I think the best place to start is, can you give our audience a little bit of background on how you ended up in your leadership role at phoenixNAP, how you ended up in the data center industry as a whole? Did you always know growing up in your teens or in your formative years that you wanted to get into digital infrastructure?
Well, so I do have an electrical engineering background. So I do have formal education in the field. But my journey getting there was a little interesting. I actually got into semiconductor out of college, and then shortly thereafter, the semiconductor market was going through a lot of what's called dumping at the time in the U.S. So a lot of the South Korean entities were coming in and basically selling underneath market when the market was really, the product was really being produced at, and so they dumped their way into market leadership positions, which they still have. Today, you fast forward and you have SK Hynix, Samsung, and Micron is basically the core three that are manufacturing memory today, and it's very relevant to this conversation, by the way. So we'll go back to that. But after that, I got into the infrastructure hosting market. So I think dedicated bare metal infrastructure. Started doing that, and out of necessity, we grew a company that was a managed services company. And we had a pretty wide range of racks here in the Valley. We actually had a deployment of about 300 managed racks of infrastructure with dedicated infra in there. And we had been anchor tenant positioned multiple times. We were going on our fourth time, and we were managing multiple NOCs at the time. Had a very diversified, platform, but it was very Phoenix centric. And we were at that critical mass where it just made sense to go build. And so we did. We built a high performance data center that was really focused on network connectivity. Was number one. That's in our name. phoenixNAP is network access point. And then the other one was really around high density, heavy power usage at the time, which was about 325 watts a square foot. In comparison, back when we went live in 2010 of June, that was about 80 watts was the average in the industry at that time. So it was significantly higher than a lot of our competition. And for us, we did that because we wanted to see a rack get full of gear, right? So that started kind of our journey down into the connectivity side and kind of create something special for the metro market. But space and power is especially back then, it can be very one-dimensional, very kind of easy to in a lot of ways, not so much to manage, but obviously to sell it. It's not the most difficult product to put together, and I'll say that with a big asterisk there. But we ended up going back into our infrastructure roots and really started doing the bare metal infrastructure again inside our data center, but not just in our colo and that we owned. And we started to expand globally, our product line, product reach, and that's what we have a global reach. A lot of our clients tend to be U.S. companies that want to be in Europe or Asia Pac, or European companies that want to be in the United States or Asia Pac. So there's quite a bit of crossover there that we do, and have been doing business with a lot of the folks that today even like going on 10 plus years. So we've been around for about 15 years now.
so interesting to hear about your roots in managed services, because that's also how I ended up here from the late 1990s through to the early 2010s, coming from having an IT services business.
So sorry.
I was working with small VARs and consulting firms and integrators throughout the 2000s on marketing and sales strategy and getting recurring revenue streams set up. And after the brutal years following 2008 and the shift away from, so many of them were very centered around Microsoft back office small business server. That's how I kind of got into this, doing contract work for Microsoft. But what I found is in the early 2010s, the ones that were still profitable were going in one of three directions. They either were becoming software builders, app developers, they were going into ERP, or they got into colocation, either because they bought a box and they put it in someone else's facility and they were renting out slices of it, or a client that was really forward thinking said, we want to do this, but we don't have anyone on staff who knows how to provision and manage it. Put this in this facility, put these boxes in the facility, and you're going to be the hands. So yeah, super interesting to see the convergence. And I see even 10 years later that there's more a blurry line between cloud and private cloud and hybrid kind of in managed services and co-location than there's ever been.
Oh, very much so. Even more now, right? I mean, managed services companies really have scaled out, and they're even more complicated. I mean, my respects to true managed services companies today. I mean, they have to own so many domains. They're very distinct and figure out ways to glue them together. And it's just such a different skill set requirement nowadays. And for us, I mean, we knew that we didn't want to scale out the company as a managed services company. So today we don't do any managed services. You know, we partner with MSPs and MSSPs. And we really own like pure infrastructure is really what we like to scale out. We put a lot of software development efforts towards making that as easy to consume as possible. And so it feels it's very infrastructure as code. I mean, literally just plug in a couple different lines of code and you're up and running within our dedicated infra. And so we made it very easy to be more like performance focused and to be easy to consume services. And that's what we want to continue to scale out globally and just do a better job at, enhancing that product line offering versus, a managed services company now today is a very different look and feel than it used to be back and I would even say even 15 years ago.
Yeah. I think there's still quite a few that are figuring out whether they still want to be the classic outsourced CIO or whether they want to have something that's way more scalable than just at heavily customized professional services. But
for sure. And there's definitely some soul searching a company has to do and really decide, because it changes your culture, right? You're dealing with a completely different DNA at that point. And so today, I mean, we worry more about like software development efforts internally as we scale out our platform. That's like a constant thing in the back of our minds, and how do you scale out like software development teams and how do you like do agile, like true agile, safe agile frameworks? That's a very different conversation, but it's also targeting like a new client for us that we're more aligned to, because it's your software, your backend DevOps groups, right, that we're dealing with. It's a different type of consumer for sure than your traditional CIO or IT as IT services, managed services companies, right? And so that there's definitely was a shift. I would say about 5 years ago, really, where the market really shifted hard, and kind of fragmented a bit. Really, people that understand all sides of it is really difficult. I mean, you get a lot of silo and a lot of very siloed effects going on around the industry, unfortunately. But it's just because of the complexity of where we're at today.
Yeah, I've seen that throughout most of my career. I've seen big ISVs, media companies really, really struggle with understanding the fragmentation. And that's a lot of the reason I think why so many of them eventually come to a channel-centric model, is because the partners can do so much better of a job hitting all the little niches than they could ever do from a direct standpoint.
100%.
So Ian, you're based in a big college town. Do you ever get like people that are brand new to the data center industry approaching you and asking you what it's like or what advice you give to them on considering that kind of a career?
Yeah. Actually, so one thing we do very actively is we do tours for the community. So a lot of we like to show what a data center is. A lot of times, even people in CIS, for example, and like true software development colleges and at ASU, for example, a lot of times they don't even understand what a data center is. So we do offer the community quite a bit of like tours to be able to do that. We have community space as well. So a lot of user groups actually meet up in our we have dedicated space for them, so they can get a better understanding there. So we come across that in the industry quite a bit. Especially people that are just starting and want to get some mentorship a little bit. So we do see that coming through and try to help them out. At least give them some guidance on what some paths to take. That's a lot of some people kind of haven't figured out where they really want to be post graduation, and so we do provide help on from more from a community and network perspective than anything structured at this point, but it's something we're working towards.
Yeah, it's so interesting with providing the community space for user groups, both earlier on in my career in the early days of Windows and with HubSpot more in the 2010s. I think for anyone that's struggling with recruitment challenges, retention challenges, building an employer brand, it is one of the highest return on investment things you can possibly have to host pizza parties or breakfast events or whatever that just give people a chance to learn and network with each other. So it's great probably too to build relationships with managed service providers in the communities where you have facilities.
Yeah, and we find that the user groups that really do well amongst each other is when they truly are educating each other. So it's not a sales pitch or anything like that. It's them taking the space and running with it, right? They create a safe environment where they can actually talk about the problems. And we've noticed that some of the user groups have really done a good job doing that execution. And really, it just becomes like true mind share, right? It's not just saying the words, but it's actually you can actually see it. It's kind of a neat process, and as a kind of a fly on the wall, and just looking in sometimes into the room and seeing what's going on. So it's a really good experience, and we learn a lot from it as well.
Yeah, for sure. You're kind of sort of getting out of the building by bringing so many people into the building and observing fly on the wall with their conversation. There's always an enormous value that comes to being the connector that brings people together for building relationships. Shifting gears into someone that's not at the beginning stages of the career, but maybe mid-career that you've known for 10 years or more, you bump into them in an event, they seem really frustrated and burned out, and they ask you for advice to kind of reboot things to get going again and pivot. What would you say to someone that's in kind of a rut with their IT career in and around infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, especially in our field's very fast moving, I would say. It has been, and it's always, and it will continue to be. I don't see any slowdown going there. So it really depends on what's their frustration, right? Is it just a corporate cultural frustration that they have? They like the job function. They may not necessarily like the employer. They might be at that point, and if that happens, people do get burned out also, and it could be reciprocal as well. So that happens. But if that's not the case, if it's more like retooling themselves or looking inward, saying, "Hey, am I at a point where I really need to upskill myself a little bit, or even make some horizontal shifts, right, to other parts of IT that are interesting or growing, or there's investment," because IT seems to be kind of like cyclical in a lot of different areas. Today the dirty word of AI. Everybody's kind of going down that path, and some folks are further down the innovation path than others, and some are actually in execution mode right now. And so there's a lot of investment going on there. But that investment's not magically coming out of out of thin air. It's being taken out of IT budgets. Let's call it for what it is. And so a fraction of that is coming out of IT budget spend to augment or to find more advantage. So follow where the IT money is being spent. The budgets are being allocated. That in itself creates a better job function. Have that understanding of your business specifically, and where you work, to see where the allocations are being put. And a lot of times it's just aligning yourself. You may already have like the core skill sets. You just need to upskill just a little bit, or horizontally shift to get into where that budgeting is being spent, and that activity level and that excitement. If that's your personality type, then align yourself better to that. If you tend to be more back end and you just want to just want to sit in your cube and do your thing, that's more power to you. But those jobs become less and less valuable. I had a friend that had a similar path he needed to take. He's been a very senior developer for very well positioned companies, but he was just hitting that wall. And I'm like, look, you got to look at your next job as an opportunity where you can use some of these soft skill developments that you kind of have already, but you don't talk about, you really don't promote, right? So promote those things and look more for your dream job that way. And so he did some of that, and he's in a good career right now. Very happy at this point.
That's super fascinating, because you really do have to contextualize it based on what they're interested in, and it's there's always seems to be a premium on soft skills and those that are able to interact well with peers and clients and partners and
communicate. It's all about basic communication. Yeah, just having a good positive attitude towards and being able to communicate. That's half the battle right there.
So, Ian, when you think about what's going on in the industry as a whole, you mentioned earlier on that you observed early on in your career semiconductor dumping. And what's super interesting about that now coming full circle is, I think as recently as a couple of weeks ago, I saw someone do a piece on a big factory that's being built right in your region to address NVIDIA, Taiwan Semiconductor. So what do you see as the implications with that, with job creation? What do you see how that possibly impacting power grid utility constraints already between semiconductor manufacturing, EV consumption, and of course, you being in Phoenix, just like my region in South Florida, there's an enormous thirst for just regular cooling way outside of IT.
Yeah, I know. So the semiconductor industry brings a lot of tag-along business, and I've seen that firsthand. Even within our own association, the neighborhood we're in, on the data inside for the data center itself, we see the amount of like folks that are in a supporting job role for semiconductor. For example, companies like Benchmark. I mean, they're expanding their presence significantly to be able to support the semiconductor industry that's expanding here. Chemical manufacturing companies. Companies that are doing electrical services. The electrical union they're bringing in people from outside right now. Like, I mean, I'm talking about thousands of jobs are being brought in that are not physically here. I mean, these jobs are coming in from other parts of the U.S. to service these folks, and so we're seeing quite a bit of like influx of folks coming in to service these semiconductor plants that are massive. I mean, they're multi-decade investments. They're 30-year investments. I mean, you're looking at TSMC's, which is one. The Intel manufacturing plant is the other one. So we have two going on. That it will create a bubble within itself as recessionary incomes, so impacts start happening here in the valley. You'll see some protection of that. Some markets are going to struggle, right, as the adaptation is happening right now, and we believe that in the Phoenix Metro will help shield some of that, because we're seeing a lot of growth here. I mean, we're seeing the impact of vertical scale out now. I mean, we have cities like Tempe is a good example, where it was Phoenix as a whole has been very flat, very spread out. Now Phoenix is building up, and that's a new impact. That's a new effect. That's a recent effect, and you're seeing that actively in cities like Tempe. I mean, you're seeing the skyline now. They never had a skyline before. It's kind of odd, but you see all the investment of net new companies coming in, and a lot of them are supporting companies, right, to that ecosystem. And so I don't see that stopping. I don't see that slowing down, and it's for decades worth of investment. So that's the positive side of the house, right? And there's always a two-sided coin. On the other side, there's a resource allocation, gap, right? So now we're seeing more power utilization. These plants use hundreds of megawatts, not tens of megawatts. They use hundreds of megawatts, large plants, large scale out, and they'll continue to use more power. And so power is going to start becoming a premium, resource, right? We've become one of the hottest data center markets in the I would say the world at this point. It used to be the U.S. Us and Ashburn, and now Ashburn kind of put in the flag. They're like, hey, we can't do more data centers, guys. We got to slow down a little bit. The utility companies just can only keep up so fast. Fortunately, we have two utility companies. One of them has already put up the flag saying, hey, we need to slow down a bit. The other one is still servicing the pipeline that they have and fulfilling that. But once that's tapped out, it's tapped out. It isn't like you can just go generate more power overnight. It takes years and sometimes, decade plus to build up proper infrastructure to be able to support scale up. And so we're getting close to that point here, but other metros are already there, right? So that's the reality as well. Other metros have even started to allow power generation, which is a big deal in our industry. That wasn't ever a thing really. It does happen in other countries, but here in the U.S., you don't really see too much power generation coming from data centers, and so you're going to see more of that also happening in our industry, more self-service power generation.
Just out of necessity for community goodwill, or for lobbying, or proactive regulatory issues, or
necessity. You'll see it because business still needs to produce and go, right? I mean, it's not going to wait around. And so people get creative, and one of the things that they can do is power generation, right? There's a lot of ways to generate power. some better for the environment than others, right? That's the other reality as well. But there's a lot of flexibility there on generating power, and so you even see more easement on that happening. I mean, there's even an article today. I was watching one of the data center journals, and they mentioned that governor in Maryland, I believe it was, he actually allowed for power generation called under a CISA Act of all things. So like even national defense got thrown in there to be able to allow and give flexibility to data centers to be able to produce and generate power on their own.
It's interesting to see the role of data centers morph into something that probably no one would have thought of 10, 15, 20 years ago, to be part of grid power shortage solutions, kind of overlapping a little bit with what people would consider utility companies.
Yeah, they're definitely that. And then again, it's getting the utility companies warmed up to the ideas too, right? That's not a competitive nature. It's actually helping out, but it is interesting to see that effect now in data centers, that because of the scale out too. I mean, data centers are getting bigger and you consume more power, right? You're talking about gigawatt facilities becoming a thing. That was never a thing even a couple of years ago. Now we're talking about gigawatt plus, facilities coming online to be able to produce and to be able to to be able to leverage the newest workloads, right? Which in this case is AI. I mean, it is very power hungry.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
And shifting gears to another topic, we've noticed that a lot of SMB decision makers, mid-market enterprise decision makers are tending to prefer a self-service driven journey now, where they're doing so much research on their own before they're ready to talk with someone from your team. Internally, are you seeing that? Your marketing and sales folks and account management folks seeing that yet, where they have to change gears a little bit? Or are they still able to use most of what they've done in the past to grow phoenixNAP?
Great question. So it really depends on the product line, right? If you look at the more self-service type products that we create, obviously that's not the case. That's marketing is very much involved in helping grow that business, and sales is involved very much post-transaction, right? So they're not involved in the initial transaction typically nowadays. They're involved post-transaction. So the flow does change, but it becomes more of a kind of helper role, right? Versus trying to sell someone or being able to coordinate complexity in the platform, right? As they scale out, they may start with one system, but they need now to scale out to maybe things that they don't see in the platform. Number one, that requires human interaction, or things they may want, requests, a feature requests, right? And so the role of sales changes there. It's more to help fulfill platform needs versus trying to sell on the platform itself. And so that's a different mindset. So the role has morphed. When it comes to traditional colocation, space and power services, the buyer tends to still be very, especially the bigger the enterprise, still very structured. Real estate, it's more like a real estate transaction mentally, right? And so the conversation is still very different there. But there's definitely a hybrid mode where folks that have really figured out that, especially with IT deployments nowadays, it's not single anything. It's not single deployment in one area, of IT even or space. It could be like deployed in multiple cloud providers, multiple colocation providers. It all needs to be interconnected. There's a lot more complexity associated with it, and companies do this on necessity because they're trying to keep a cost basis under control, or they themselves need more flexibility, or sometimes they don't even realize it and they just have a less sprawl, which does happen, and we do see it. And so it really depends what part of the journey they're in. And so having sales folks that can adapt and can kind of understand these different use case scenarios. Again, our industry is getting more complex, not less. So there's definitely more, I would say, demand from a salesperson. It's not picking up the phone and dialing. That's not what's getting deals done today. It's understanding their IT needs. Really, at the end of the day, that's what's getting deals done. And when you can have a conversation, to have the talk, you don't have to go deep and be the deep technologist, but you have to really understand what they're trying to accomplish and how. And so sometimes you can come up with creative ways to help them out. And that really is what closes deals. And so having folks that really are adaptive and can understand that is I think is going to be what the new sales organization is going to look more like versus your traditional smile and dialers, right?
So it truly is the salespeople morphing into more roles of consultants, kind of what I've been calling for a couple of years. They look more like a Big Four consultant than a traditional transactional focused quota focused salesperson. Yeah.
I mean, the transactional side of the house is easy to fulfill for organizations like ourselves. I mean, many, right? I mean, you can automate that entire process, So we've changed around what the salesperson is really doing, post transaction. Post transaction is more important because that's where you build a relationship. That's where you get an opportunity, right? That's where you get and grow that book of business and understand what they're really trying to do. And we've seen that across our sales folks, right? They really try to understand, even the technology itself, and also, you've done well when you have their technology people whiteboarding and showing you, how they're structured and their flows and their plans for the future, right? And where they want to scale out. That's when you've done a good job at that point.
When they're bringing you behind the curtain to show you what's really going on at a deep level and asking you for insight and advice on what they should do.
Yeah, and also even very proprietary systems that they've set up and developed, right? Giving you insight to that. That's proprietary knowledge that you can't research. That's a very walled and shielded information. Once you get to that point, you're in a good place.
You're definitely checking off the box of educating and building trust, and you've built the trust because they're confiding in you with trusted information. Yeah, that's so cool. Final big area I wanted to ask you about today, Ian, are you noticing a change yet in your own daily routine with the rise of AI? Has it changed what you spend your time on? Has it changed some of the software and tools that you're using to lead and run phoenixNAP?
Yeah, so I mean, we were early adopters of so AI. Okay, to level set, AI workloads have been around forever, right? I mean, they have become mass market and understandable by everybody now. I mean, I think there's more, or at least a want to really understand AI and where it can evolve to. But if you look at the financial industries, companies, they've been around forever. They've been doing these kind of workloads. Healthcare has been doing this kind of workload for a long time, and so there is a very mature understanding of folks that do this. HPC clusters, life sciences people, right, have been doing this forever. So and a lot of the new AI clusters look more like an HPC cluster than anything else than traditional IT, even. So that these workloads are very mature. We ourselves were very much into inference at the time with like the Intel Xeon platform. We're doing a lot of inference for folks because it made sense. You don't have to throw GPUs at that. You can, especially back then, you can just do a lot of good level inference with standard CPUs, not training, but inference. And so there's a very mature market of folks that exist. Now you throw in a lot of folks, new entrants, and people that are trying to understand it, or people that are really trying to scale it out. That's where it gets very interesting and changes, right? And so our level of understanding from an infrastructure perspective has increased tremendously as an organization across the board. We're getting a lot of manufacturer-led training, I would say, at this point from different manufacturers, and so that's good for our our staff and also our culture and our DNA. It's been changing little by little. On the software side, we use that. Everybody, I think in the world, especially when ChatGPT becomes available, started using that heavily, and some folks still do. Me personally, I was a very early adopter of some of the Copilot, in Visual Studio. That was made available. I do a lot of fun coding as a hobbyist, right, predominantly. But for me, it was good seeing that and seeing trying to bring that into work as well. And it wasn't just myself, but a lot of folks that are, I would say, non-developer job roles, right? And then in our organization really started to embrace more of that and start doing more coding. I would say, our ISCs right now they're going through and bringing up their Python skill level specifically for AI though, and not just normal Python, but like Python that is more relevant to workflows that are based on AI, with different manufacturers. So that's definitely a shift, and we've seen those slight impacts. We expect more. I mean, as it proliferates next year, It's going to be in all laptops and all different devices, and it's going to be more readily available for people as you look at what Apple and Intel and all these folks are doing different manufacturers, right? With neural processing units now with NPUs, and so you're going to see GPU, NPU, and CPU all together, side by side, and software manufacturers are already doing, today they already have built out really good software that supports it, and it's very native, and so it's really making that hardware accessible to developers, and when it's native to their laptops, doesn't matter if it's an Apple laptop or an Intel laptop or any other manufacturer, it's a easy, readily available thing. I think we'll see a lot more innovation coming from that, and I'm really looking forward to that because it's been the biggest of the big companies and some really creative startups that are taking advantage of it. But it's that middle ground. When that middle ground really gets a hold of it and understands it and innovates, that's what's going to be transformational to our industry.
That's terrific. To get your perspective, one, on how you're using it internally, how it's changed how you've developed doing simple coding, and how it's going to proliferate to hardware and flow down into the business applications. Ian, do you have a favorite podcaster that you listen to keep up with advice that you think would be great to interview next on this podcast?
Not so much, but the folks from Acquired, if you can get them, you've hit a home run. The folks from Acquired really create some amazing podcasts. They've been around for a long time now, but their level of, I would say, research that they do on different companies, right, as they go through their journey, and especially as anybody who's an entrepreneur or really just interested in even the technology, it's very technology focused companies, right, that have some kind of technologies focus. But in the level of research and how much coverage they do, and it is really another level. I mean, it's really a fun and just a highly educative a thing. So I really recommend those folks. If you can get them on there, more power to you, man.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check that out and put them on the short list. Ian, this has been great. I thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. What's the best place for someone to follow what you're working on, or if they have questions on anything we talked about today or want to learn more about phoenixNAP, where would you direct them?
Yeah, so phoenixNAP.com, pnap.com, right? If you want to type less letters, so really easy to put in kind of what we do. We're pretty approachable. We also have quite a bit of I would say thought leadership information as we've kind of matured more, and so it's also a good place to find some interesting just tech trends, I would say, especially if you're looking to get into some of the AI workload. We just launched this week actually some of our newer AI products and continue to go down that path.
Yeah, thought leadership education stands and does so much of the heavy lifting that used to be done by humans in the early and middle part of the journey, and it's your best way to stay with early stage prospects throughout their whole research and comparing of option prices, and it's kind of the new way of building a brand. Totally, and
awesome. and there's a lot of good people that are, and again, this is where artificial intelligence is not there yet, right? It's a lot of good folks that are doing true research and putting a professional focus onto it, right? And that's rare also. This isn't just a bunch of AI created content that we've developed. We put a lot of time and effort into it, and continue to also get good feedback on it as well. Yeah, as you've been saying, that's what the people have been saying all along for the last year and a half since OpenAI became more mainstream, is there's going to be a huge premium on human on human to human interaction as people grow tired of all the synthetic AI created content. For sure, synthetic data and hallucinations are a real thing, man, and it's weird, So yeah, we try to avoid that like the plague. Thanks again, Ian. You've been listening to Ian McClarty, who's the president of phoenixNAP. Thanks so much for joining me. This was fantastic. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.